We interviewed or investigated two separate landing reports over there. One was the December 21st case reported by Horace Burns of Grottoes, who said he saw a UFO cross the road ahead of his car stalled, and the object landed in the field. We visited with Professor Ernest Gaiman of the Eastern Mennonite College, and he has done a very thorough investigation job for us. He is a NICAP member. The other incident was more recent. I believe the date was January 19, also near Waynesboro. This involved a man who said that he had witnessed a UFO landing and saw some small beings emerge from the object. There was no kind of communication. He just was confronted by these beings, and he stated that he was very frightened by the experience. Now, I hasten to add that we don't necessarily believe this story 100%. We're interested in objective scientific investigation, and that's why we were there. But one point I would like to make is that this man very obviously had been intimidated by some kind of government agents, unidentified. We don't know who they were, Air Force, FBI, CIA. But it was very obvious from talking to this man's friends, who are very responsible local citizens, that this man had been intimidated. He could not talk about his experience.
Mr. Hall, in your investigation of these two sightings, were there any material evidence of a craft of some kind landing?
No, in the first case, December 21st, there was physical evidence. Professor Gaiman investigated the site and tested it with a Geiger counter and found extremely high radioactivity at where the object had been seen to land. This was later denied by the Air Force, or they implied that Professor Gaiman was a professor of German and didn't know what he was doing. But the Air Force failed to mention that a couple of DuPont engineers were also present and verified the high radioactivity. And this is a good form of physical evidence, as was the fact that the man's car motor failed as the UFO passed by. In the second case, there was no physical evidence, but there had been several rain and snowstorms in between the sighting and the investigation, so this is not too surprising.
As you heard Mr. Hall said, in the case up at Grottoes, the man said that when the alleged UFO hovered over his car or passed over it, his engine stalled out. This also happened in the case of a sighting in Williamsburg, which you are probably familiar with, where two men were driving down the highway, and in separate cars, both men said their cars stalled out as they came within sight of a large cone-shaped object hovering over a field. These sightings and sightings in years gone by have also shown cases where electronic effects have come about when the UFO had been sighted. I asked Mr. Hall if there was any explanation for this.
Yes, we have a section in the UFO evidence report which lists past cases of so-called electromagnetic interference. There is no known explanation for this. There are a few guesses that it apparently is some powerful electrostatic field causing it, but the exact mechanism of how it works, nobody knows.
Another case on record concerning these electromagnetic interferences happened several years ago when a group of jet planes were heading out to sea down somewhere in the southern part of the country near Florida, and something happened and they never returned again. So they sent another Coast Guard plane out to try to find them, see if perhaps they had crashed or something, and this plane too would never return. Although they could never be sure, they believed that some kind of electronic interference had caused their radar and their compass to go completely out of whack, and thus they lost their course and simply ran out of fuel in the middle of the Atlantic. This is, too, a very interesting case. It has been the policy of the press, both presses, to report on UFO sightings only within the state that the sighting occurs. I hasten to add here that both presses here in Virginia, I think, gave very excellent coverage to sightings here in the Virginia area. And for this reason, Richmonders did not know whether Virginia was the only place where flying saucers were being seen during December and January. We, of course, knew they were being seen here. And until this report, I feel, most Richmonders didn't have any idea that there were sightings elsewhere during the same period. We asked Mr. Hall about this.
Yes, as a matter of fact, when the sightings were occurring in Virginia, they were actually occurring all up and down the East Coast. And apparently, these stories very seldom go out on news wires outside of a given state. So the overall picture is not realized by anyone in one state. We did get sightings at the same time from New Hampshire. Incidentally, there was a case of a car being stalled as the UFO passed over in New Hampshire. There were sightings in Massachusetts, Connecticut, North Carolina, and Georgia. When the sightings stopped in the Virginia area, they also stopped up and down the coast, and now they have shifted out to the west coast, and we're starting to get very similar reports from Washington State, Idaho, Oregon, and all that region. There was one case where a border patrolman reported seeing a large disc-shaped object which descended and hovered above his car, ahead of his car, and then after hovering for a few seconds, zoomed back up through the overcast and disappeared. On the same night, there was a reported landing, which the object left markings on the ground. It's the same sort of thing. It's been very consistent over the years, but it appears to be an unusual number of reported landings in the past year or so.